People at the flea market thought Officer Blake was joking when he stopped at a dusty corner stall, staring at a weak, injured German Shepherd being sold for just $10. The dog didn't move, didn't bark, didn't even lift his head. But the moment Blake knelt beside him, something stirred, something broken, something begging to be understood. The seller shrugged, saying the dog was useless now, a retired police dog nobody wanted. Blake reached into his pocket, unaware that buying this retired police dog for just $10 would uncover a secret, and turn his entire department upside down. Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The wind carried dust across the open fairground, the kind of empty roadside space where forgotten things were quietly sold, and quickly forgotten. Officer Blake Carter wasn't supposed to be here. He had only stopped to refuel his patrol car, but something unusual caught his eye. A cardboard sign hanging from a rusted pole, letters unevenly scribbled in black marker. Only $10. At first, Blake thought it was a joke, but then he saw the dog. A German Shepherd lay on the dry ground, ribs faintly showing beneath thinning fur. His legs were covered in old scars and fresh wounds. His breathing was slow, too slow, and yet his eyes were alert, not confused, not lost. They were watching everything, every movement, every sound, like a soldier still standing post. A man in a mud-stained vest stood beside him, arms crossed, gaze cold. $10, he muttered without emotion. Take him or leave him. Blake knelt slowly, careful not to startle the dog. Hey, buddy, he whispered. The dog didn't growl, didn't flinch, but his tail didn't move either. He simply stared at Blake with a strange mix of exhaustion and defiance. Where'd he come from? Blake asked. The seller shrugged. Retired police dog. Too old, too broken. Not worth feeding anymore. I'm getting rid of him today. Blake's jaw tightened. Something about the man's tone didn't sit right. Police dogs weren't dumped like trash, and they definitely weren't sold at roadside stops for the price of a fast food meal. The dog shifted slightly, revealing a faded patch of fur on his side, a mark that looked disturbingly like a burn scar. There were also symmetrical cuts near his thigh, too precise to be accidental. Blake's instincts fired instantly. These aren't normal duty injuries, he murmured. The seller stiffened. Look, officer, you asked a question. I answered it. $10. Take him or walk away. Blake studied the German Shepherd again. The dog's ears twitched as if listening to the conversation. Then, in a small, trembling effort, he lifted his head and nudged it toward Blake's knee. A plea, a whisper of trust. Blake felt his chest tighten. This dog wasn't unwanted. He was scared. He was hurting. And he was trying to choose him. Why so cheap? Blake pressed. The man avoided eye contact. He's sick. Doesn't have long. Just needs someone to take him off my hands. But Blake saw it. The subtle panic in the man's fingers. The way he kept glancing at the dog as if afraid of what the animal knew. Something wasn't right. Something was being hidden. Blake reached into his wallet, pulled out a $10 bill, and held it out. The seller snatched it quickly as if relieved to be rid of the burden. Blake slipped his arms under the dog gently. The shepherd winced, but didn't resist. Don't die on me now, Blake whispered. But deep inside, he felt it. This was no ordinary retired K9. This was the beginning of something far bigger than a $10 rescue. Blake carried the German Shepherd toward his patrol car, feeling the dog's trembling muscles against his arms. The animal wasn't just weak. He was exhausted in a way that told a deeper story. A story of survival, not aging. A story of fear, not retirement. When Blake set him gently on the back seat, The dog didn't curl up the way injured dogs normally did. Instead, he kept his head lifted, eyes locked on the man who had sold him, watching him, tracking him, as if waiting for him to make one more move. Blake closed the door slowly, unease prickling up his spine. He walked back toward the cellar. "You said he's retired from the force. Which department?" The man scratched his neck, avoiding eye contact. Local unit a few towns over. Don't remember the name." Blake narrowed his eyes. "Every K-9 has paperwork, retirement forms, vet records. Where are his?" The man shrugged again, too quickly this time. "Lost them. Look, officer, he's just an old dog someone dropped on me. I don't have anything else to tell you." Blake studied him closely, sweaty palms, tapping foot, eyes constantly shifting toward the road. This wasn't just nervousness. This was fear. The dog in the back seat let out a low, rumbling growl, not toward Blake, but toward the cellar. A warning, a message only the dog understood. Blake stepped closer. "If someone hurt that dog, even once, I need to know." The man raised both hands defensively. "I didn't lay a hand on him. He came to me like that. Some guy dumped him late last night." "What guy?" Blake demanded. "I don't know. He was in a hurry, paid me to get rid of the dog today and not ask questions." Blake's heartbeat quickened. Paid to get rid of him. Why? Officer instincts surged through him like an electric pulse. Something about this transaction felt wrong. Not criminally sloppy, deliberately sloppy, like someone trying to erase a trail. Blake walked back to the patrol car, the man's words echoing in his mind. Paid to get rid of the dog, used today. Don't ask questions. Don't keep him. He opened the back door and knelt again. The dog looked up at him with tired, intelligent eyes. Blake reached out slowly, placing a hand on the dog's neck. That's when he felt it. A faint indentation under the fur. A missing collar tag. Not broken, not cut, removed. "Someone didn't want you identified," Blake whispered. The dog's eyes flickered with a haunting recognition, as if remembering something dark. Blake glanced back at the cellar. The man was already walking away, fast, like he couldn't escape quickly enough. The dog struggled to lift his head, letting out a soft, desperate whine, but not from pain. From urgency. Blake swallowed hard. This wasn't a normal rescue. This wasn't a retired K-9. Something dangerous had happened to this dog, and someone wanted him gone before anyone could find out, and Blake had just walked straight into the middle of it. Blake opened the back door of the patrol car, again hoping the dog would lie down and rest. But instead, the shepherd pushed forward, struggling to sit upright despite the pain etched across his body. His eyes stayed locked on Blake as if he feared being left alone for even a second. "It's okay, buddy," Blake murmured. "You're safe now." But the dog didn't relax. His breathing was shallow and every muscle trembled, yet he kept inching toward the edge of the seat, determined to stay close. Blake gently pressed a hand against the dog's chest, guiding him back. "Easy, easy." A low whimper escaped the dog's throat. Not from weakness, but from refusal. He wanted to follow Blake. Wherever Blake went, he wanted to go. That's when Blake understood. This dog wasn't clinging out of fear. He was choosing him. Blake took a slow breath, moved by the unexpected trust. He glanced toward the cellar. The man was already speeding away in an old pickup truck, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Good, Blake, White thought, because he had questions, and he planned to find answers. He returned to the car, and as he opened the driver's door, he felt a soft weight press against his shoulder. The dog had struggled across the seat just to reach him, resting his head gently on Blake's arm. A silent plea. "Don't leave me." The gesture hit Blake hard. "All right," he whispered. "I'm right here." He eased into the seat, and the dog kept leaning closer as if reassuring himself that Blake was real. that he wasn't being abandoned again. As Blake started the engine, the dog lifted his head slightly and let out 3 small, rhythmic barks. Not random, not distressed, patterned, trained. Blake froze. That was a signal. One he recognized from emergency canine protocols. "You're alerting me," Blake whispered, stunned. But about what? The dog's eyes moved to the dusty windshield toward the road where the seller had driven off. Blake followed his gaze, eyebrows furrowing. "Something's wrong with that man," he muttered. The shepherd pressed his paw onto Blake's arm, weak but deliberate. It was as close to a confirmation as a dog could give. Blake swallowed, adrenaline building. This dog wasn't just refusing to be left behind. He was trying to communicate, trying to warn him, and despite the exhaustion shaking through his fragile body, he wasn't giving up. "All right, partner," Blake said quietly. "Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out." The dog laid his head gently on Blake's lap, and in that moment, without a single word spoken, a partnership and a mystery officially began. By the time Blake reached his home on the outskirts of town, dusk had already settled. The sky was painted in deep purples, and the quiet neighborhood seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. Blake parked the patrol car gently, then lifted the German shepherd into his arms. The dog was weak, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning every shadow, as if danger could leap from it at any moment. Inside the house, Blake laid out a blanket near the fireplace. The warmth should have comforted the dog, but he didn't settle. Instead, he forced himself upright, sniffing the air with slow, deliberate breaths. "Relax, buddy," Blake said softly, kneeling beside him. "You're safe here." But safety wasn't what the dog sensed. In a sudden burst of tension, the shepherd turned toward the front door, ears pricked, body trembling. He growled, a deep, warning rumble that didn't match his weakened condition. Blake froze. Nothing was outside, no footsteps, no sound. But the dog kept staring, muscles coiled, ready to defend. Blake stepped to the window and peeked out. Darkness. An empty street. Just rustling leaves. Still, the dog refused to sit down. Then he limped toward the hallway, sniffing, searching, pacing restlessly from door to door as if trying to locate something Blake couldn't see. Every movement looked painful, yet he pushed through it. "What are you looking for?" Blake whispered, following him. The dog stopped at the back door, the one that led to Blake's backyard, and there he began to scratch, weakly at first, then harder, then with frantic urgency. "Hey, easy, easy," Blake said, catching him before he hurt himself. But the shepherd barked, sharp, urgent, demanding attention. Blake hesitated. "You want me to look outside?" The dog barked twice, loud despite the exhaustion, then pressed his head firmly against the door. Something was out there, or something had been out there. Blake slowly opened the door, stepping into the cool night air. The backyard was silent, a calm sheet of wind brushing through the trees. But then Blake noticed it. The old shed at the far end of the yard. The door was slightly open. He never left it open. Blake's heart tightened. He stepped toward it slowly, hand hovering near his holster. But when he reached the shed and pushed the door wider, all he saw inside were old tools, dusty shelves, harmless clutter. "Nothing," he murmured. But when he turned, the dog was standing right behind him. He had forced himself outside, trembling violently. His nose pointed at the shed floor. A whine escaped his throat. Soft, terrified. Blake knelt. "What is it? What happened here?" The shepherd didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe deeply. He was frozen, staring at a spot Blake hadn't noticed. A faint smear on the shed's wooden floor. Dark, thin, almost wiped away. Blood. Blake's breath caught. Someone had been here, recently, and the dog knew exactly who. Blake crouched beside the faint smear of blood, his pulse thudding in his ears. The shed was supposed to be untouched, forgotten, yet the dog was acting like it was the center of something far bigger. The German shepherd trembled but didn't back away. Instead, he lowered his head, sniffed the wooden floor, and let out a short, sharp bark, not random, not fearful, purposeful. "Show me," Blake whispered. The dog stepped forward, slow, limping, wincing, but with precision. He sniffed the floorboards, then moved toward the back wall of the shed. Blake watched closely. Every movement had intention. Even injured, the shepherd navigated the tight space with disciplined patterns, sweeping side to side like he was running an official canine search. But this wasn't a normal search pattern. It was advanced, elite level. "Where did you come from?" Blake murmured. The dog paused at a stack of old crates, then lifted his paw and tapped the corner twice. Blake's breath hitched. That was a command he recognized, a canine indicator for hidden objects. "You're trained for deep searches," Blake whispered, "not just surface level." He moved the crates aside, dust rising in the air. The dog's breathing sped up. His eyes focused intensely on one specific spot. He lowered his head again and pressed, his nose against a narrow gap between two boards. Another bark. Low, short, direct. A find. Blake hesitated only a second before prying the loose board up with his fingers. Beneath it was a small recess, dark and dusty, as if untouched for years. But Blake immediately saw something off. Footprints. Fresh. Not his. Someone had accessed this space recently. Inside the recess, something metallic glinted. Blake reached in and retrieved a small dented storage tin. He set it on the floor beside him. The dog didn't look away. He stood guard over it, just like a trained canine protecting evidence. "You're not retired," Blake whispered. "You're still working." He opened the tin carefully. Inside were fragments of torn paper, a broken microchip, and a faded patch from a police vest. One Blake didn't recognize. The dog nudged the patch with his nose, then looked up at Blake with desperate urgency. "You're trying to tell me something," Blake said breathlessly. "Trying to show me what happened." The shepherd let out a soft, frustrated whine, as if the truth was right there, but Blake wasn't fast enough to understand it. He placed a steady hand on the dog's head. "Don't worry, I'm listening." The dog closed his eyes for a moment, exhausted, but his tail moved. Just once. Trust. Connection. Partnership. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This dog had a mission, and Blake had just become part of it. Back inside the house, Blake laid the metal tin on the kitchen table, his mind spinning with more questions than answers. The dog followed him slowly, limping heavily, yet refusing to rest. His eyes stayed sharp, locked on Blake as if urging him to keep going, to put the pieces together. Blake crouched beside him again and gently lifted the dog's chin to inspect his collar more closely. The leather was old, cracked, and worn down, but something about it didn't look accidental. It wasn't the typical, standard-issue K9 collar he had seen dozens of times. There were cuts, precise cuts, made intentionally. Blake turned it over, squinting under the kitchen light. A faint metal plate was stitched to the underside of the collar, almost invisible beneath the torn leather. But the plate had been scratched aggressively, deep gouges that had erased whatever numbers once engraved there. "Someone tried really hard to hide who you are," Blake whispered. The dog whined softly, pressing his head into Blake's palm, as if acknowledging the truth. Blake retrieved a flashlight and angled the beam across the damaged plate. Even scratched, he could see hints of shapes, the curved tail of a number, the faint top of a letter. Not enough to read, but enough to prove this dog once belonged to a high-level unit. Normal K9 units weren't given metal ID plates stitched inside collars. Only specialized units were. Blake fetched a magnifier from a drawer and leaned in closer. The dog remained. Perfectly still, disciplined, patient, as though he had been trained for investigative handling. "There must be something left," Blake murmured. "Some part they couldn't scratch out." Then he saw it. A tiny mark on the edge of the plate, a marking no scratch could erase completely. A symbol, a triangle with a line through it. Blake's eyes widened. That's impossible. Only one K-9 division used that symbol, a classified tactical unit known internally as Unit 9. Their dogs weren't deployed for patrol work or drug detection. They were used for undercover operations, high-risk stings, and deep infiltration missions only a handful of officers even knew existed. And they never retired their dogs to the public. Ever. "How did you end up dumped at a roadside sale tit for $10? Blake whispered. The dog let out a deep, low huff. Not a bark, not a growl. A sound of frustration, grief, and urgency combined. Blake sat back, adrenaline kicking into overdrive. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase this dog's identity, to erase his past, and that meant only one thing. The dog wasn't discarded. He was silenced. Blake stood, fists tightening. Someone wanted you gone, not retired, not rehomed. He looked down at the dog whose gaze burned with fierce intelligence. "But you survived," Blake whispered, "and now I need to find out why." The dog slowly rose, wobbling but determined, and tapped Blake's foot twice, the same deliberate signal as before. A command, a message, a vow. They weren't done, not even close. Blake barely had time to process the meaning of the symbol before the dog suddenly stiffened. His ears perked, his body tensed, and he stared toward the back door as if someone had whispered his name through the night. "What is it?" Blake asked quietly. The dog limped forward, urgency overriding the pain in his legs. He scratched once at the door, then turned to Blake and barked. Sharp, insistent, the same pattern as before. A call to follow. Blake grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside into the cool night air. The yard was still, the moon casting long shadows across the grass. But the dog didn't hesitate. He pushed ahead of Blake, limping with determination toward the old shed again. "You already showed me what was inside," Blake murmured, but the shepherd didn't slow. He wasn't heading to the shed door this time. He circled to the back of the shed, a side Blake almost never looked at. There, the dog pressed his nose against the wooden boards and let out a shaky whine. He scratched at the ground, weak but insistent. "You want me to dig?" Blake asked. The dog barked once, a confirmation. Blake knelt and began brushing away leaves and loose dirt. At first he expected nothing more than roots and soil, but then the beam of his flashlight hit something metallic buried beneath the shed's foundation. A handle. Blake's breath caught. "What in the world?" He dug faster, his hands scraping against cold metal until a rectangular frame revealed itself. A concealed hatch, no larger than a briefcase lid, almost perfectly hidden beneath the shed. The dog backed away, giving him space but never taking his eyes off the hatch. Blake swallowed hard, then pulled. The hatch resisted at first, rusted from years of neglect, but after a firm tug, it snapped open with a metallic groan. A gust of cold, stale air escaped. Inside the hidden compartment lay a small, waterproof black case. Sleek, professional, government grade. Blake lifted it carefully, his pulse hammering. "Is this what they were looking for?" he whispered. The dog lowered his head, nose inches from the case, breathing anxiously. His body language changed, from urgency to fear. Not fear of the box itself, fear of what it meant. Blake unlatched the case. Inside were organized stacks of documents sealed in plastic, a flash drive, and something else that made his blood run cold, photographs. Dozens of them. Some showing men whose faces were blurred, others showing drug stashes, weapons, and coded maps. But every photo had one detail in common. the same dog collar symbol matching the dog's hidden plate. "This is intel," Blake whispered. "Sensitive intel." The dog nudged one of the photos with his paw. A picture of a warehouse, time-stamped 2 weeks ago. The same time frame the seller claimed the dog was dumped. "You were on this case," Blake realized, "and someone tried to erase everything, including you." The dog whimpered softly, confirming what Blake already feared. This wasn't a retired K-9. This was a survivor from an active operation gone deadly wrong. And Blake wasn't supposed to find any of this. He looked at the dog, then at the open hatch. "Whoever silenced your unit," he whispered, "they know you're still alive." The dog met his eyes with a trembling but determined stare. And for the first time, Blake truly understood. The real danger was only beginning. Blake carried the black case inside like it was made of glass, the dog limping close behind him. He set it gently on the kitchen table, his hands trembling. The documents inside weren't normal case files. They were encrypted, coded, sealed, the kind of evidence only specialized task forces handled. The German Shepherd sat beside him, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths, but his eyes never left the case. It was as if he knew exactly what was inside, and exactly how dangerous it was. Blake opened the case fully. Inside were 3 bundled stacks of plastic-wrapped papers, all labeled with red markers. Classified. Tier 1, Threat Do Not Duplicate Eyes Only. Unit 9. His stomach twisted. Unit 9. The same covert division the dog belonged to. The same unit no one outside high-clearance circles knew existed. "What happened to your team?" Blake whispered. The dog lowered his head, ears flattening. A silent grief Blake didn't need words to understand. He pulled out a sealed evidence bag containing a sleek flash drive. Black, no markings, completely anonymous. He held it up, and the dog's ears perked alertly. Blake exhaled slowly. This is what they were after, isn't it?" The dog tapped the floor twice with his paw. "Yes." Blake grabbed his personal laptop. His police computer was too risky to use. Whoever erased this dog's identity may still have access to official systems. He plugged in the drive. At first, nothing happened. No files, no folders, just a single encrypted icon pulsing faintly. Blake clicked it. A password prompt appeared. Of course, only Unit 9 handlers would know it. He stared at the dog. "Buddy, unless you can type, we're stuck." But the dog moved closer. He lifted his nose and pressed it gently against one of the photographs from the case, the one showing a warehouse with a timestamp. Blake frowned, studying it again. Coordinates printed in tiny numbers along the bottom edge. Blake blinked. "No way." He typed the coordinates. The screen flickered, and the drive unlocked. Thousands of files exploded across the desktop. Surveillance images, recorded conversations, intercepted messages, maps showing smuggling routes, and lists of names. Some circled in red. Blake scrolled, stunned. This isn't just intel. This is a takedown. A full operation. The dog barked once, not in excitement, but in warning, because as Blake kept scrolling, he found a final folder marked Elimination Order. His throat tightened. He clicked. The first file loaded, a list of Unit 9 operatives, K-9 handlers, and their dogs. Every handler had a red X beside their name. Every dog had one too, except one, the shepherd beside him. "Your whole unit eliminated," Blake whispered, "except you." He clicked the second file. A grainy security photo appeared, the dog fleeing a burning warehouse. Underneath, printed in red, target still missing. High priority. Blake felt the room tilt. Someone had wanted this dog dead. Someone powerful. Someone connected enough to murder an entire covert unit. And now that he had found the evidence, they would be coming for him too. The dog lifted his head slowly, pressing it against Blake's leg, steadying him. Not in fear, in solidarity. They were in this together now. Blake stared at the glowing laptop screen, his pulse pounding in his ears. The files revealed more than corruption. They revealed a massacre, a deliberate erasure of an entire elite K-9 unit. And the only reason this German Shepherd was still alive was because he had escaped before they could finish the job. The dog limped closer, resting his weary body beside Blake's chair. His head dropped onto Blake's knee, a gesture that carried both trust and devastation. "You saw it happen, didn't you?" Blake whispered. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, didn't deny it. Blake gently scratched behind his ear. "I wish you could tell me what they did to you, to your team." The shepherd lifted his eyes, and in them Blake saw something he had only seen in human officers returning from nightmare missions. Grief buried beneath duty. This dog wasn't just trained. He was loyal beyond measure, loyal enough to keep fighting even after losing everything. Blake opened a folder labeled Aftermath Reports. Secure inside were photos of the burning warehouse, the same place the dog had been photographed escaping. In the corner of one image was a blurry silhouette of a man in tactical gear, dragging two limp dogs toward a van. Blake swallowed hard. "They killed your teammates," he said softly, "and they were coming for you next." The shepherd's ears pulled back, his breath hitching. He nudged the laptop, pushing Blake toward another file. Blake opened it. A short video clip loaded, shaky footage from a damaged body camera. Smoke, screams, barking, gunfire, and through the chaos a handler's voice shouting, "Go! Get out! Run, boy!" Then a flash. The camera fell. The screen went dark. The clip ended with a timestamp. 2 hours before the seller claimed, "Someone dumped the dog." Blake leaned back, overwhelmed. "Your handler. He saved you. He gave his life to protect you." The dog pressed his forehead against Blake's arm and let out a soft, broken whine, the sound of remembering someone he loved and lost. Blake clenched his jaw. "They didn't just wipe out a unit. They covered it up. They hid the truth, and you've been carrying this whole thing alone." The shepherd lifted his head slowly, eyes intense, as if saying, "Not alone anymore." Blake nodded, emotion tightening his chest. "You're right, not anymore. I'm going to finish what your team started. I'm going to uncover every name behind this." The dog tapped his paw on the floor twice, deliberate, confident. A vow. The past was no longer buried. The truth was waking up, and Blake knew one thing with absolute certainty. This dog hadn't just survived a mission. He was the key to exposing everything. Blake replayed the body cam footage again, watching the final seconds before everything went dark. Smoke, barking, gunshots, a handler's desperate shout. The moment the video ended, Blake felt a cold realization settle over him like a shadow. None of this was coincidence. None of it. The seller hadn't been some clueless man trying to get rid of an injured dog. He had been part of the chain, someone planted to dispose of the last living witness from Unit 9. Blake closed the laptop and looked at the German Shepherd. The dog was alert, staring at the front window with a stiffness Blake recognized instantly. "Something wrong?" Blake whispered. The shepherd didn't blink. He growled, low, quiet, a sound he only made when danger was near. Blake moved toward the window, lifting the curtain just enough to peek outside. A car was parked across the street. Dark, unmarked, engine running. He hadn't noticed it before. The dog let out another warning growl, stepping between Blake and the window, his body trembling but protective. Blake's heart hammered. "They found us already." He grabbed the laptop, the evidence case, and shoved them into a duffel bag. He needed to move. If the people who eliminated an entire covert unit were watching his house now, they weren't here to talk. He returned to the shepherd. "Buddy, we're leaving. Come on." The dog tried to stand, but his injuries made him stumble. Without hesitation, Blake scooped him up, carrying him toward the back door, but the dog barked sharply, shaking his head. "No?" Blake whispered. "Why not?" The dog limped toward the front instead, stopping beside Blake's duty belt. He nudged it with his nose. "You want me armed?" Blake asked. The shepherd tapped the belt twice. "Yes, be ready." Blake secured the belt around his waist and checked his firearm. He wasn't planning on shooting anyone tonight, but the people outside weren't ordinary criminals. They were trained, experienced, and backed by the same corruption that wiped out Unit 9. He opened the door slowly and stepped outside with the dog pressed against his leg. The night air felt heavier now, filled with tension. The parked car's headlights flicked, just once. A signal. Blake tightened his grip on the leash. "We're not backing down, not tonight." The shepherd let out a quiet, determined huff. Blake approached slowly, but before he could get halfway across the yard, the car revved loudly and sped off into the night, tires screeching. They weren't attacking. Not yet. They were confirming something. That the dog was still alive. That Blake had him. The shepherd watched the road carefully until the car disappeared completely. Then he looked up at Blake. Eyes, sharp, focused. "They weren't here to kill us," Blake said softly. "They were checking if the job was done." The dog exhaled as if confirming it. Blake's fists tightened. "The seller didn't dump you," he realized aloud. "He was part of it. He was ordered to kill you, and he couldn't do it." The shepherd's ears twitched, sadness flickering through his exhausted eyes. Blake placed a hand over the dog's chest. "Whoever is behind this, we're coming for them." The dog leaned into his touch. A silent agreement. The game had changed. Now they were being hunted. The air felt colder now, heavier. Blake locked the front door and double-checked every window while the dog lay near the hallway, his ears twitching at every stray sound. The tension was thick enough to taste. "We need to leave before they come back," Blake said quietly, stuffing essentials into a small backpack. "They won't wait long." But as he turned toward the dog, the shepherd suddenly lifted his head, body stiffening. A car door slammed outside, another, then another. Blake's blood ran cold. "They're back!" The shepherd limped to the living room window, growling with a controlled, razor-sharp intensity Blake had never heard from him before. This wasn't fear, this was combat mode, the instinct of a dog who had survived more than any K9 should. Lights swept across the wall. 3 shadows moved past the front porch. Blake drew his firearm, heart hammering. He whispered, "Stay behind me." But the dog stepped forward instead, positioning himself between Blake and the front door, protective despite his injured body. A quiet knock echoed through the house. Not a polite knock. A testing one. "Officer Carter," a cold voice called. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." Blake swallowed. "Who are you?" "Concerned officers," the voice replied. "Open the door." The dog growled again, a low, vibrating warning that vibrated through the floorboards. Blake moved toward the window and peeked through the curtains. 3 men in tactical jackets stood outside. No badges, no department vehicles, no identification. Not police. Imposters. The leader stepped closer. "We know what you found, and we know who you're hiding." Blake's skin prickled. They weren't bluffing. The shepherd nudged Blake's leg twice, a signal. Blake recognized it instantly. Retreat to cover. He backed away from the door just as one of the men kicked it violently. The whole frame shook. Blake ducked behind the hallway wall, aiming at the door while the dog positioned himself beside him, breathing hard but unwavering. Another violent kick. The lock cracked. The hinges groaned. "Final warning, Carter," the leader shouted. "Open the door, or we come in shooting." The shepherd barked, sharp, commanding. It wasn't just a bark, it was a tactical alert. Blake whispered, "Okay, partner. On 3. But before he could count, the door exploded inward, wood splintering across the room. Gunfire erupted. Blake dove behind the couch, firing a warning shot. The intruders scattered, shouting to each other. "He's armed! Watch the dog!" The dog charged forward, not recklessly but with calculated precision. Even injured, he moved with shocking skill, using the shadows for cover. He lunged at the first intruder, clamping onto his forearm, dragging him down with a strength fueled by fury and survival. "Get him off!" the intruder screamed. Blake fired another shot, forcing the second man to fall back behind the porch pillar. The leader cursed, raising his weapon toward the dog, but Blake tackled him before he could fire. They crashed into the hallway wall. The leader swung, but Blake blocked the blow and delivered a hard punch to his jaw. The man staggered. Meanwhile, the dog released the wounded intruder and turned toward the second man trying to enter. Despite his limp, he sprinted with terrifying resolve. The intruder fired, but the dog dodged, grazed but undeterred, slamming into him and knocking the weapon from his hand. Blake shouted, "Good boy, keep him down." Within seconds, 2 intruders were disarmed, groaning on the floor. The leader attempted to crawl toward a fallen gun, but the shepherd stepped in front of him, lips curled in a cold, unmistakable warning. The man froze. Even he understood what that growl meant. Blake pressed his knee into the leader's back and cuffed him. "It's over. You picked the wrong officer and the wrong dog." But as he said it, the shepherd's ears snapped upward. Footsteps. Running. Someone outside. The dog barked once. Urgent. Another enemy had escaped, and he was going to return. The intruder who escaped sprinted across the yard, disappearing into the shadows beyond the fence. Blake rushed to the doorway, breath sharp, weapon ready, but he couldn't see where the man had gone. The darkness swallowed everything. Behind him, the German shepherd struggled to stand. His chest heaved, his injured leg barely supporting him. Blake turned quickly. "No, stay," he ordered. "You've done enough tonight." But the dog refused. He pushed himself forward, wincing with every step, determined to stay by Blake's side. The 2 remaining intruders groaned on the floor, hands cuffed, defeated. The leader glared at Blake through swollen eyes. "You think this is over?" he spat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Blake ignored him. His focus stayed on the yard. A branch snapped. Blake's heart slammed against his ribs. He raised his gun, scanning the darkness. "Come out," he shouted. Silence. Then, a flash of movement to his right. The dog reacted first. With a sudden burst of strength Blake didn't think he had left, the shepherd lunged, colliding with Blake's chest and knocking him to the ground just as a bullet ripped through the space, where Blake's head had been. The gunshot echoed through the night. Blake hit the floor, stunned. The dog growled viciously, positioning himself over Blake, shielding him with his body despite shaking violently from pain. The escaped intruder stepped from behind a tree, gun raised again, aiming directly at Blake. Blake scrambled for his weapon, but it had fallen across the room during the impact. He reached for it, fingers inches away. Another gunshot, but this time it wasn't aimed at Blake. The dog had launched forward, slamming into the intruder's leg, throwing off his aim. The bullet whizzed into the dirt. The intruder stumbled, cursing, trying to shake the dog loose. "Get off me, you stupid mutt!" But the shepherd clung on with everything he had left, not letting go, even as the man kicked, struck, and tried to pry him off. Blood matted the dog's fur, but his grip stayed firm. Blake seized his moment. He grabbed his fallen weapon, rolled to his knees, and aimed. "Drop it." The intruder hesitated just long enough. Blake fired a warning shot inches from the man's foot. The intruder froze, breath ragged. "Gun on the ground," Blake ordered. The man dropped it. The dog finally released his leg but collapsed instantly, legs trembling, body collapsing into the dirt. "No!" Blake shouted, rushing forward. He cuffed the intruder with lightning speed. then dropped beside the dog. The shepherd's breathing was fast, too fast, and his body trembled uncontrollably. Blake wrapped his arms around him. "You saved my life," Blake whispered, voice shaking. "You brave, stubborn boy. You saved me." The dog nudged his nose weakly against Blake's wrist, a faint, loving gesture, before his head sagged. Hey, stay with me." Blake lifted him gently. "I'm not losing you, not after everything you've survived." Sirens echoed in the distance now, backup approaching. Blake held the dog tight. "You held on for your unit," he whispered. "Now hold on for me." The dog blinked slowly, and for the first time, Blake feared this might have been his final act of loyalty. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and cold metal. Blake paced the hallway outside the emergency vet unit, hands trembling, shirt still stained with the dog's blood. Every second stretched into a lifetime. The shepherd had been rushed into surgery the moment Blake arrived. He hadn't lifted his head since collapsing in Blake's arms. "Please," Blake whispered to no one. "Just hold on." An officer hurried toward him. Captain Reyes, one of the few Blake trusted completely. Her expression was grave, a folder clutched in her hand. "Carter," she began softly, "we ran the IDs on the men you detained." Blake straightened, jaw tight. "Tell me." Reyes opened the folder. "They're not criminals. They're not gang members. They're ours." Blake's heart dropped. "What?" "Internal agents," Reyes said quietly. "Deep cover operatives, all tied to a classified program connected to Unit 9. The world spun. "They were ordered," she continued, voice lowering, "to eliminate every trace of a failed operation, including the dogs, including handlers, including evidence, no survivors, no loose ends." Blake swallowed hard. So the dog wasn't sold. He was discarded, marked for termination? Reyes nodded. Whoever headed the operation blamed the unit for exposing corruption. High-level corruption. Someone powerful enough to destroy an entire task force. Blake felt the air leave his lungs. "And the seller?" "Not random," Reyes confirmed. "Former informant, paid to get rid of the dog discreetly, no questions asked. He panicked, couldn't bring himself to kill a K9, so he tried to pass him off cheaply, hoping someone else would handle it." Blake closed his eyes, anger burning through him. All this time, the dog had been hunted not because he was dangerous, but because he knew the truth, because he had seen what they did to his handler, to the entire unit. Reyes stepped closer. "Carter, the files you found, they're enough to expose everything. The dog wasn't just surviving. He was protecting evidence. He was trying to find someone who would listen." Blake's hands tightened into fists. "And now they'll come after anyone who protects him." Reyes held his gaze. "Then we protect him back." A light flickered above them. A vet stepped out of the surgery room, removing her gloves slowly. Blake's heart stopped. "Officer Carter," she said gently, "your dog—" Blake braced himself for the worst. The vet took a quiet breath before speaking. "He made it through surgery," she said softly. "It was close, but he's alive." Blake closed his eyes in sheer relief. His knees nearly buckled. Captain Reyes placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You can see him," the vet added. Blake stepped inside the dim recovery room. The German shepherd lay on a padded table, wrapped in bandages, hooked to monitors that beeped softly in the background. His chest rose and fell slowly, but steadily. His eyes were closed, but Blake could feel the strength still burning in him. He approached quietly and placed a hand on the dog's head. "You're the toughest soldier I've ever met," he whispered. The dog's ear twitched at the sound of Blake's voice. Reyes entered behind him. "Carter, we need to talk about what happens next." Blake straightened, looking at her with a fire she hadn't seen in him before. "We take this public." Reyes hesitated. "You know who we're up against. These aren't small-time criminals. They're high-ranking leaders with reach across multiple departments." "All the more reason," Blake said. "They killed an entire unit. They murdered handlers and their dogs. They tried to erase a hero and bury the truth." He looked down at the shepherd, whose chest rose a little faster, recognizing Blake's voice and tone. "I'm not letting them silence him," Blake continued. "Not again." Reyes opened the file Blake had found. "The evidence is solid, but exposing this, Carter, it'll shake the entire State Department. Maybe more." "Good," Blake replied, "and it should. People need to know what they did." He brushed his hand over the dog's fur gently. "You carried this alone," Blake whispered to him, "but not anymore. I'm finishing what you and your handler started." Reyes nodded slowly. "All right, I'll call the state investigators, federal oversight, internal affairs, and this will go far above everyone involved." Blake exhaled. "And the dog?" Reyes smiled softly. "Once this is over, he'll be protected, honored, and officially yours." The shepherd's eyes opened just a sliver, weak but alive. He let out a faint huff, nudging Blake's hand with the little strength he had left. Blake felt emotion tighten in his throat. "You fought for justice," he whispered. "Now I'll fight for yours." Reyes placed a hand on his arm. "We have the truth, and we're not letting them bury it." Blake nodded, determination burning through him. This wasn't just about evidence anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about restoring honor, exposing corruption, and giving a hero the recognition he deserved. And Blake was willing to risk everything to make it happen. 3 weeks later, the precinct was unrecognizable. Journalists, investigators, federal agents, everyone swarmed the building. Captain Reyes and Blake stood shoulder to shoulder as officials carried boxes of seized documents from offices that once belonged to untouchable leaders. The corruption ring within Unit 9's oversight had been exposed. The files Blake retrieved, the files the dog protected with his life, had sparked a statewide investigation. Arrests were made. Resignations poured in. A scandal erupted so massive it shook law enforcement from the ground up. But none of that mattered to Blake as much as what was happening today. A small stage had been set up outside the station. Rows of officers, K-9 units, and civilians filled the courtyard. Cameras clicked. Flags waved softly in the breeze. And at the very front of the crowd stood the German shepherd, heeled, steady, and proud, wearing a polished new collar engraved with his true name, K-9 Valor, Unit 9. Blake adjusted the dog's vest, the patch gleaming in the sunlight. Valor stood tall beside him, his posture strong despite all he had survived. Officers and handlers who had known Unit 9 wiped tears from their eyes. Today wasn't just a ceremony. It was closure. It was justice. Captain Reyes took the microphone. "Today," she said, voice steady, "we honor a hero who refused to be silenced. A K-9 who survived when his entire unit was taken from him. A dog who carried the truth across miles, pain, and betrayal." Valor glanced up at Blake, tail lifting slightly. Reyes continued. "And we honor the officer who listened, who protected him, who risked everything to bring justice to the fallen." The crowd erupted in applause. Reyes motioned toward Blake. He stepped forward with Valor at his side. Cameras flashed. Blake took a deep breath, emotion swelling in his chest. "This dog," Blake began, "lost everything. His team, his handler, his identity." He placed a hand gently on Valor's shoulder. But he never stopped fighting. And he never stopped believing someone would finally hear him. Valor leaned into him softly, eyes shining. "He saved my life," Blake continued, "and he saved the lives of every officer who would have been targeted by the corruption he exposed. So, today, we don't just call him a K9. Blake knelt beside Valor, voice thick with emotion. We call him a survivor, a soldier, and the bravest partner I've ever known. The audience stood, applauding loudly, some with tears streaming down their faces. Captain Reyes stepped forward holding a small velvet box. For extraordinary bravery, loyalty, and service, we present K9 Valor with the Medal of Honor. She pinned the medal onto Valor's vest. The dog lifted his head proudly, as though feeling the weight of every fallen member of Unit 9. Blake whispered, "You did it, buddy. Your team can finally rest." Valor nudged Blake's chin, a soft, grateful gesture that said more than any words ever could. As the crowd cheered, Valor sat beside Blake, not as a broken, forgotten dog worth $10, but as a hero reborn. And from that day forward, wherever Blake went, Valor walked beside him, honored, protected, and loved for the rest of his life. A legacy reclaimed, a truth revealed, a partnership unbreakable. The story of K9 Valor had finally